Welcome to the Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Unstressed Exec. I'm Dr. George Vergolias, executive and resilience coach, forensic psychologist, and your guide for navigating pressure, people, and personal transformation. Today, we're in part 3 of our conflict mastery series, and we're diving into something that can make or break any relationship, and that is communication. More specifically, how to express your truth clearly, respectfully, and powerfully without escalating into conflict. Because here's the reality. Most people don't know how to fight fair or speak assertively or listen well. But those are skills that are learnable. Those are not hardwired into our DNA. Those aren't some luck of a genetic draw. We can learn them and we can cultivate those skills, and they change everything. So if you're tired of being misunderstood, if you're avoiding hard conversations, or always being the one who explodes or shuts down, this episode is for you. Let's dive in. I'm going to talk about 5 separate segments today to kind of break this topic down into more palatable ways. And the first is we have to begin to understand why communication falls apart in the first place. So let's start by identifying what doesn't work. According to Doctors John and Julie Gottman from the Gottman Institute, they have studied over 3,000 couples, and the biggest predictors of relationship failure are what they call the Four Horsemen of Communication. Number 1 is criticism, attacking someone's character instead of describing a behavior. Number 2 is emotional defensiveness, denying accountability, denying responsibility, or generally just making excuses for one's behavior. Third is contempt. Sarcasm, eye-rolling, name-calling, blaming. Fourth is stonewalling, which is essentially intellectually and emotionally shutting down or just withdrawing from the conversation. All of these greatly damage the efficacy of communication amidst conflict. And they don't just erode trust, they actually create emotional scar tissue. How do we fix this? Well, we learn to replace those 4 habits with the following: gentle startups, taking responsibility and accountability for our actions and the impact on others, expressing needs, not judgments. And this is similar to seeking understanding before we move to judgment, and staying emotionally present. When we take those 4 things, gentle startups, taking responsibility, expressing needs, not judgments, and staying emotionally present, we're able to combat and mitigate the negative impact of criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So it's critical that we open the conversation with understanding those. The second part is, how do we move from passive presence or aggressive presence to assertive? Passive doesn't help. We withdraw. We're avoidant. Aggressive doesn't help. We tend to shut the other person down because we come off as attacking. What we want to be is assertive. So let's talk about these styles. Most people fall into one of 3 categories. Passive is the first one. And this is a category where you avoid conflict. You don't express your needs. And over time, by doing so, it breeds resentment. We kind of harbor resentment. Another way to think of this is like anger that we're swallowing instead of expressing. And by swallowing it, it starts to eat us from the inside. The second style is an aggressive style. You bulldoze your needs through the conversation with intensity or dominance. I venture that every one of us has been in an argument at some point with a very aggressive style. And what does it create on the receiving end? It creates fear. And that's not helpful for effective communication. It's certainly not helpful to work through emotional differences. The third category is what we tend to be moving towards, and that's assertive. You speak clearly, respectfully, and directly. When we Speak assertively. When we adopt an assertive style, it creates respect. It opens the atmosphere or the playing field for resolution. And that's where we ideally want to be. And it is the sweet spot. Assertive communication means that you are saying what you feel. You are stating what you need, as well as what you might want, and understanding the difference between wants and needs. You're holding boundaries. You're also being open to the other person's perspectives, feelings, and reality. That's where we want to be. It's not loud. It's also not soft. It's assertive, it's clear, and it's calm. So, how do we get there? How do we get to that assertive place? Well, one way to start to reshape our default patterns of communication is start thinking about the I statement formula. And this is a classic tool that really never goes out of style. And this is how you use the formula. I feel blank, fill in the emotion, when blank, fill in the behavior or situation, because fill in the blank with an impact. And then I need, and then you fill in the blank with what the request or the solution is. So I feel, fill in it with emotion, when you fill in it with a behavior or a situation, because explain how it impacts you. And then the second part is I need, and then you describe the needs. What kind of solution or request do you need from the person? Let me give you a tangible example. I feel hurt when you interrupt me during meetings because it makes me feel dismissed. I need us to agree on a way to manage contributions more respectfully. So why does this work? Well, this approach does three things. It owns your emotional reality. You're taking accountability for your feelings and your thoughts. Second, it identifies the behavior without blaming. It simply says, this is how it impacts me, but you're not pointing the finger directly. And then it provides a path forward by identifying what you need from the other person without judgment. Research from Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication book, which is a wonderful book I highly recommend. It confirms that when people use feeling and need language rather than judgment and blame, conflict outcomes improve significantly. So you've done the I statements now. You've brought awareness. You understand the different styles, passive or aggressive versus the preferred assertive style. What else do you need in your toolbox? Well, listening is the next thing, and the power of listening towards understanding. I will often say in my coaching endeavors, seek understanding before judgment, right? Most people listen to respond, and we all still do this, right? I train on this. I've been coaching on this for years. I give keynotes around the world on this topic. And there's still times I will be in a heated argument and I'm no longer listening. I'm thinking of the next thing I'm going to say. It's very common. We've all done it. We all will still do it. The question is, can we narrow that down? Can we limit that and replace it more with listening, not with an intention to respond, but listening with an intent to understand? So real listening means dropping your agenda, reflecting back what you heard, and asking a series of clarifying questions so you can deepen your understanding. And that does two things. It not only helps you understand better, it also helps the other person feel heard and understood. And that goes a long way towards resolving conflicts, because then they can get their ego out of the way and you can talk more openly about your needs as well as hearing and understanding theirs. So with this notion in mind, try this reflective phrase. What I'm hearing you say is this. Did I get that right? Or, as I understand it, your perspective is this. Explain the perspective. Am I understanding you, or am I getting you? Right? That goes a long way. It creates psychological safety. It creates a clear message that even if I don't agree with you, I'm willing to hear you out and try to understand where you're coming from. And neuroscience backs this up. Active listening reduces cortisol and raises oxytocin levels in the other person, which increases trust and calms emotional reactivity. They've done studies on oxytocin, which is really, really interesting. And what they found is when we observe, well, first of all, when we do a good deed, our oxytocin levels, which is generally a a chemical in our system that kind of boosts a feeling of calm and it boosts a feeling of goodwill. It makes us feel good. It almost has a dopamine effect in our system. When we do good deeds, oxytocin levels skyrocket. But here's what's fascinating. When you witness a good deed being done, you're standing in a park and you see somebody across the park bring some food to a homeless person. They do a good deed and you witness it. Your oxytocin levels also bust up and they increase. So this is kind of a contagious effect when we're doing this well. And it certainly works amidst the conflict and within a, conflictual interaction. When people feel heard, they calm down, period, full stop. So we've talked now about the power of listening to understand. Again, seek understanding before judgment. Listen to understand first before responding. But there are times where the communication maybe has already occurred at some level. Maybe you're well into a series of communications, or maybe there's been a track record or a pattern where there's been some kind of rupture in the relationship. So the request is, how do you repair that communication after it breaks? There might also be a situation where you are 15 or 20 minutes into a dialogue, an argument, before you remember any of this podcast. And then you start applying these concepts, but you're 15 minutes down the road and you said some mean things and they've said some mean things. So how do you repair that communication after it breaks? Well, on this one, we've got to be real. You're going to mess this up. You're going to fuck this up, if I could say it more bluntly. We all do. What matters is how quickly and honestly you catch it, you bring awareness to it, and you repair it. To do so, think of saying things like this. I didn't show up the way I wanted to. Can we try that again? Or I realized that I got defensive there for the last 10 minutes and I really wasn't listening as well as I could have. Let me slow down and really hear what you have to say. Or, boy, I feel like I'm not expressing myself very well and that came out wrong. What I really meant to say is, and then you go on to reframe what you said before that didn't come out so well, right? Repair, we often think of repairing or the repair stages. Oh, I fucked up and now I got to do damage control. And while there's some truth there, I'm not going to pretend that isn't true to some degree. Repair really is the secret weapon of long-term trust. It doesn't mean never messing up. It means owning it, learning from it, and showing up better the next time. And when you start looking at repair as a superpower, you really can use it to full effect. I would be neglectful if I did not do this podcast episode and talk about some special considerations with high conflict conversations. We all have them. We will have them in the future, whether they're high conflict or high stakes or both. We have to think about some of the unique variables that go into these. And the reality is some conversations just require extra care, period. These include some of the following: separation or divorce decisions, co-parenting boundaries, betrayals, such as someone stepped out or they cheated or they otherwise did some kind of emotional or relationship betrayal, and even workplace disputes involving power imbalances. All of these fall into that category of high conflict conversations. When you are in these moments, everything we've already talked about in this episode applies, but I want you to add an overlayer of the following considerations and the following approaches. Number one, prepare ahead of time. Know what your intention is, give thought to your audience, and give thought to what resistance or barriers or challenges they're going to bring up and how you might respond to those in an optimal way, right? Again, first towards understanding, then later towards judgment or resolution. Number two, use written frameworks if needed and whenever possible. Email or write out the dialogue, write out what the intention of the conversation is and what you'd like to accomplish and what you'd like to cover. This gives you time to prepare. It gives them time to prepare with no surprises. Remember, when we're surprised with accusations, we immediately get defensive. If you're human, you get defensive. It happens. So by giving notice ahead of time, it prepares both parties. What you can do individually is also write out an imaginary script of how you expect that conversation to go. I would not share that with the other person. This is for your own internal preparation. Number three, set ground rules. such as no interrupting, no yelling. We're going to keep this civil. We're going to stay focused on the issue at hand. We're not going to bring up things from the past. And then ideally at the outset, get them to agree to those ground rules. Fourth, for very high conflict conversations, bring a third party if necessary, whether it's a coach, a therapist. At work, it could be HR or another manager or even just a colleague to witness the interaction. Often when I am pulled into hostile termination discussions at work, where I am helping HR or security navigate with somebody that they expect is going to get hostile or even violent. So having those third parties present can be very, very helpful. It's not only a witness, it prevents another person there, which often can dissuade somebody from escalating. Not always, but it does have a positive impact on trying to keep them more civil. And remember, just because you speak clearly, it doesn't mean the other person will hear you clearly, but your job is to show up with integrity, right? So we've talked through quite a bit. We opened with talking about why communication falls apart and the four horsemen of communication, which are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. And then we talked about how you replace those habits. Gentle startups, taking responsibility, expressing needs, not judgments, and staying emotionally present. We talked about the difference of passive and aggressive tone or approaches versus the assertive approach. We want to be at the assertive approach, saying what you feel, stating what you need, holding boundaries, and being open to the other's reality. Then we talked about the importance of I statements. I feel blank emotion when blank behavior or situation that's going on because blank what the impact is. And then this is what I need from you. And then whatever the request or the solution is. We talked about the power of listening to understand before rushing to judgment or solutions. And then we talked about repairing communication after it breaks. And that repair can be a superpower. It really can be a secret weapon that helps build trust over time. And then we talked about notes on high conflict conversations. And when you know you're going into these, prepare ahead of time, use written frameworks when you need them, set ground rules, and bring a third party if you need to. So let me give you some takeaways as we kind of wind this to a close. I have 6. First, poor communication isn't a flaw. It's often untrained. You can train this. This is not magical. This is not genetic. You can train to learn these things and deploy them well. The 4 horsemen kill connection. Replace them with clarity, ownership, and presence. Third, assertive communication is about truth without harm. We can speak truth while still being respectful and protecting the dignity and the respect of the other person. Fourth, I statements work because they soften defensiveness. Fifth, listening well is more powerful than speaking well. I'll say that one again. Listening well is more powerful than speaking well. We get so caught up in what we're going to say. We need to be more caught up in what we're going to listen for. And lastly, 6th, repair is more important than perfection. We are going to mess up in our relationships. We are going to mess up in our connections and our communications. It's going to happen with the best of us. The question is how we repair it and how we adjust. All right. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a new tool or technique to try, do me a favor and take 5 minutes after this and write it down. One conversation that you've been avoiding, and also write down one skill you'll practice differently next time. Then share this episode with a friend, a partner, a colleague, and let's normalize skillful communication. And certainly share it with anyone that you think needs to hear this. Remember, be well, speak clearly, and stay grounded. Next week, I'm going to wrap up the Conflict Mastery series with a banger that you will not want to miss, turning conflict into growth, and you'll want to be here for that one. Because it's all about taking more of the negative slant of what we talked about and flipping the script and turning it into a superpower that can propel you forward. Now your call to action. Insight without action changes nothing. If you're ready to turn awareness into movement and stress into strategy, coaching can be the catalyst. Coaching will change you. Reach out to set up a free consultation. You can find me at www.theunstressedexec.com or on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Unstressed Exec. Let's create real momentum starting now. Until next time, I'm Dr. George Vergolias, The Unstressed Exec. Thanks for listening. See you next time. And remember, shift happens.